Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. The Kremlin has set out its demands for the 30-day US ceasefire plan, according to two sources. US envoy Steve Witkoff is to arrive in Russia soon, while a phone call between Trump and Putin's aides has taken place, according to the Kremlin. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry says it has shot down 77 Ukrainian drones in an overnight attack, while Russian security forces say a Ukrainian plot to send explosive devices in parcels to military and civil servant personnel has been thwarted. Israel has categorically rejected a UN report alleging genocidal attacks on Gaza reproductive centres. This comes as discussions take place in Doha, discussing a potential ceasefire and future plans for Gaza. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te says China is deepening its influence campaigns and infiltration as the self-governed island detects 20 Chinese military aircraft and 7 naval vessels around the island. The EU and Canada have announced reciprocal tariffs on the US, intensifying the global trade war as leading foreign ministers get set for a G7 meeting in Canada. Ex-Australian cricketer Stuart McGill has been found guilty of taking part in drug supply, though the former spinner was acquitted of knowingly taking part in a cocaine deal. Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte says, "I am responsible," as he is placed into custody at the International Criminal Court to face charges related to his controversial war on drugs. NASA and SpaceX have postponed the mission to bring back stranded astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore. A hydraulic issue meant the Crew 10 mission was scrubbed. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te accused China of escalating its influence campaigns and infiltration efforts against the island, which Beijing seeks to absorb. Lai highlighted China's military drills, trade sanctions and ongoing campaigns aimed at forcing Taiwan to accept its sovereignty claims. Speaking after a security meeting, Lai stated that Beijing had targeted various sectors of Taiwanese society, including organised crime groups, media figures and both current and former military and police officers. Meanwhile, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported 20 sorties of People's Liberation Army aircraft, 7 naval vessels and 1 official ship in Taiwanese waters. According to the president, Taiwan remains committed to defending its sovereignty and democracy, with President Lai reaffirming the island's stance against Beijing's increasing pressure. Let us take a listen to what the Taiwanese president had to say.
数十年来，中国并吞台湾，消灭中华民国的野心，没有一天改变。
We are now joined by my colleague Thomas Porteous, anchor and correspondent, to discuss this escalating situation even further. Thomas, thank you very much for joining us. We've seen, of course, what Lai has accused China of doing, but what do you think the response will be from the Taiwanese?
So it is important to the Taiwanese that they keep track of these military movements outside of Taiwan. There's appropriate measures are used to respond by the Taiwanese on a daily basis when these aircraft vessels come into their airspace and around the island. The first thing is monitoring and surveillance. Taiwan's armed forces track and monitor these Chinese vessels continuously, assessing any potential threats. They also deploy scrambling air patrols. The Ministry of National Defense, they deploy these combat air patrols, which involve dispatching these fighter jets to intercept and observe any intruding aircraft, any intruding vessels, ensuring that they do not violate Taiwan's airspace in particular. Naval vessel deployment is also something that reoccurs when these military drills go on. They dispatch ships to shadow and monitor once again these Chinese naval vessels that happen near its waters. The last thing is the activation of land-based missile systems. If anything were to happen, if these movements by the Chinese were to turn aggressive, Taiwan activates these land-based missile systems to ensure they have some defense.
Yes, and Thomas, looking of course at the impact that we might see off the back of these drills, in your opinion, is there any wider regional or global implications given the continued action by China?
Well, of course, the United States is a long-time ally of Taiwan. Admiral Samuel Paporo, commander of the United States Pacific Fleet, highlighted apprehensions that this could escalate, and that these extensive military drills that have been happening again and again and again could potentially serve as a cover for an actual attack, suggesting these rehearsals might be for forced unification. Japan also has experienced increased militarization, including the establishment of radar sites and military bases. This is to prepare for the possibility of China becoming aggressive against the island of Taiwan. Australia, again, is closely monitoring the Chinese warships that have been frequently doing these training drills near them as well in Taiwan. We obviously saw these Australian flights being cancelled over these live fire exercises that China was committing in the Tasman Sea in this time. And so it's some people say that Taiwan is flexing their muscles, but this is a regular thing that is going on, and Taiwan is constantly on edge, preparing itself to make sure that it is ready if something was to happen.
Thomas, to bring an end to this discussion we're having, you mentioned it there, these drills are happening on a regular basis. They're happening throughout the recent months. What's different, if anything, to what's happening and China's efforts in terms of them ramping up?
Well, nothing is really that different about today's activities. We see this happen on a very, very regular basis. Taiwan is always keeping it in check and making sure to do these responses to make sure that China's efforts don't turn aggressive. China has been vocal that it sees Taiwan as part of its territory, and people from the outside are getting prepared into when China might actually use military action to take Taiwan militarily, which could be a possibility. This is an ongoing situation, a constantly developing situation, and there are eyes around this all around the world.
Thomas Porteous, thank you very much for joining us. You will be staying with us. But we move on to Europe, and Russia's Federal Security Service has said that it had prevented a series of attacks against military and civil servants. According to the FSB, Ukrainian special services planned to send explosive devices in parcels by mail. There are also reports that a Russian citizen recruited by the Ukrainian special services was arrested in Pervoyarsk, who at the beginning of the month sent these packages to military and government officials in Moscow, Voronezh, Krasnodar and the Saratov region. After completing the task, communication with the man was cut off and the reward was not paid. However, these details are yet to be confirmed. Staying in Russia, and is reportedly outlined 3 key demands for a ceasefire truce amidst ongoing tensions in Ukraine. These demands come as Moscow faces a difficult decision on how to proceed with the conflict, showing no signs of easing. In the latest battlefield developments, Russian forces are reportedly in the final stages of pushing Ukrainian troops out of Kursk, with President Putin visiting the region for the first time as his forces advance. Meanwhile, US envoy Steve Witkoff is headed to Moscow for talks on the ceasefire. There are reports of a telephone call between Putin and Donald Trump. Let's listen in to what both leaders have to say.
Очень рассчитываю на то, что все стоящие перед нашими подразделениями боевые задачи будут безусловно исполнены. И территория Курской области в ближайшее время будет полностью освобождена от
The only thing that stops a bullet is a human body. And these are bodies that are young people. And they're stopping a lot of bullets because a lot of bullets are flying across those level fields. Dead flat, no protection whatsoever. It is a disaster. And so I hope he's going to have a ceasefire.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has launched the UN 80 initiative to improve the efficiency and cost-effectiveness of the United Nations in response to a growing liquidity crisis. The initiative aims to identify potential improvements, review existing mandates and explore structural reforms to address the UN's increasing resource challenges. Guterres stressed the importance of regular assessments to ensure that the UN remains effective in fulfilling its mission, especially as many member states struggle to pay their contributions fully and on time. While some nations, including the United States, have reduced funding to specific UN agencies, Guterres pointed out that the real consequences are felt by vulnerable populations. The UN's budget for 2025 is set at $3.72 billion, with the US being the largest contributor. To the Middle East, and Israel has categorically rejected a UN report which accused the state of genocide. The state has called the report biased. This particular UN report, receiving heat, has accused Israel of committing genocidal acts against Palestinians, particularly through the destruction of women's healthcare facilities during the Gaza conflict. The report also accused them of using sexual violence as a war strategy. The UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry claims Israel intentionally destroyed the main fertility centre in Gaza, imposed a siege and blocked vital medical aid, including for safe pregnancies and neonatal care. The report further states that Israel's actions, including preventing births and causing a surge in maternal deaths due to restricted medical supplies, amounted to the crime of extermination. Additionally, Israel's security forces are accused of using forced stripping and sexual assault as punishment following the Hamas-led attacks on October the 7th, 2023. Joining us once again to discuss the latest development we're hearing from the UN is Thomas Porteous, anchor and correspondent. Thomas, the UN report that we've seen is pretty damning, to say the least. Can you give us some more information on what exactly it entails?
Well, some of this stuff is very disturbing. Israel obviously categorically denies all of these claims and rejects the UN, calling it biased and unimpartial. We've heard claims of genocide, we've heard claims of sexual violence against Palestinian detainees. I'm going to go through some of these claims now. I just want to say before that Israel has categorically denied all of these claims. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry says that Israeli forces stripped female detainees and used sexual assault against Palestinians following Hamas-led attacks in southern Israel in October. There has also been some reports of Israeli soldiers using sexual violence against male detainees as well as these female detainees, that they were subjected to numerous sexual assaults and sexual torture. These are very, very disturbing claims, and Israel obviously categorically denies all of them.
Thomas, this isn't the first time that allegations of genocide have been put onto Israel, especially when the conflict was ongoing. Israel have continued to deny genocide and say that that is not the case. Is this report going to change anything, do you think, in terms of a geopolitical understanding of the situation? There have been nations who have, of course, supported the views of some of these charities and organisations who have accused Israel of genocide. And then leading off that, do you think there would be any impact potentially on relations with Israel and some Western countries?
Well, the United Nations, the way it works is that Israel obviously has a lot of allies, including the United States, including the UK. And so one country has one vote in these particular organs. That they certain there is one organ in particular called the International Court of Justice, based in the UN, which has once issued an advisory opinion in 2024 declaring Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories as unlawful and accused them of humanitarian crimes. There is obviously this huge case that has previously happened in December of 2023, in which South Africa, the nation of South Africa, actually filed against Israel at the ICJ, accusing it of genocide, using that word genocide against the Palestinians living in Gaza. And it argues that Israel demonstrates an intent to destroy in whole or in part Palestinian people as a whole, and not just Hamas, which is what Israel has said that they have set out to do. There is also the Goldstone report. This is dating way back in 2009, which once again accused Israel of these crimes, of committing war crimes against humanity. Israel has been attacked by the United Nations, accused by the United Nations of multiple humanitarian issues over the years. Israel has denied it once, again and again, and denies all allegations, and is often held up by its allies. These things are vetoed by their allies at the UN in these different organs, and this will most likely the same thing will happen here.
Yes, and Thomas, to bring this conversation to a close, we of course are currently sitting at a bit of an impasse in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Of course, the first phase of the ceasefire is finished, although all-out war hasn't resumed. There is a desire from Gazans to get aid back into Gaza, and there's also a desire for Israelis to get hostages dead or alive returned. Do you think this UN report that we've seen will have any impact on talks that we know are taking place and have been taking place over the Israel-Gaza conflict?
This report will most likely have minimal impact on the talks that are going on. This has obviously been a very fragile situation. Many people have been uncertain whether this thing it's been surprising to some people that it's lasted as long as it has. There's obviously now talks to extend this first phase of the truce. Hamas still have a certain amount of hostages, and both dead and alive. Israel have also blocked off the aid, which the UN once again has reported that has led to millions of people in Gaza to start to run out of food. Negotiations in Doha have officially continued with Hamas delegates, with US delegates, with Arab delegates and Israeli delegates. And what no one can really know about how this whole situation is going to end. We can only take it one day as it comes, and hope this ceasefire deal continues, and we see a lasting peace.
Thomas Porteous, anchor and correspondent, thank you very much for your time and your insight. We move on, and the Baloch Liberation Army terrorists have killed 21 hostages during a train hijacking in Pakistan. As per reports, the security forces have now eliminated all 33 assailants. The passenger train Jafar Express was carrying 440 passengers in restive southwestern Pakistan. Following the attack, Pakistan's information has released a statement saying no passengers died because of the operation and praised the military for averting a potential catastrophe. The passengers who escaped or were released by the militants described panic as gunmen seized control of the train, sorting through identity cards, shooting soldiers, but freeing some families. Passengers who escaped or were released by the militants described panic as gunmen seized control of the train, sorting through identity cards, shooting soldiers, but freeing some families. Here's how the now released hostages have described the ordeal.
खाने के लिए कुछ नहीं था, पानी भी मांग के पीना पड़ता था। एक घूंट सब ने मिलके बांटा है, जितने भी सर्वाइवर थे बंदे। तो अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह अल्लाह की करम नवाजी से आज बच गए हैं। कई बंदे उन्होंने शहीद भी कर दिए हैं। तो हमारी अभी ज़िंदगी लिखी हुई थी, हमारी अल्लाह ताला ने ज़िंदगी लिखी हुई थी, हम बच गए। अफ़गानिस्तान से जॉब करके
स्टेशन पे हमने शिफ्ट किया, जो मुश्किलात है जो भी है, लेकिन अल्लाह ने हमारी मदद की। हमने उनको बाइज़्ज़त तरीके से मच स्टेशन पे उतारा है। और अभी जो आप हमारी टीम देख रहे हैं ईदी की, ये तमाम गाड़ियाँ लेके जा रही हैं सिविल अस्पताल को।
रात उन्होंने बंदी बना के रखा हुआ था। सुबह 5 बजे जैसे वो कुछ अंदर आराम करने लग गए थे, 1-2 चक्कर लगाता था, क्योंकि उन्होंने रात को बंदे बहुत शूट किए थे, कुछ पंजाबी कुछ सराइकी। तो उन्होंने बोला अभी ये भागेंगे नहीं। उन्होंने पहले भी ये बोला था कि अगर तुम भागोगे तो हम शूट कर देंगे।
We have some breaking news coming in, and a powerful 4.4 magnitude earthquake has struck Naples and the surrounding areas this morning, marking the strongest tremor in the city for decades. The quake, which hit at 1:25 a.m. local time, caused widespread panic, with residents rushing into the streets for safety and many spending the night in their cars. The earthquake centred near Pozzuoli in the seismically active Campi Flegrei region was recorded at a shallow depth of 3 metres by the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology. Witnesses described a loud roar preceding the quake, followed by intense shaking, power outages and visible damage to buildings and vehicles. We head to Asia, and former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been taken into custody by the International Criminal Court. He was arrested in Manila on murder charges linked to his deadly war on drugs. The Philippine authorities handed Duterte over to the ICC. He has arrived in Rotterdam and is now in a detention unit on the Dutch coast. Duterte faces charges of crimes against humanity. The ICC says he created and funded death squads to kill suspected drug users and dealers. If convicted, he could be the first Asian ex-leader tried at the ICC. As he was arriving in the Netherlands, Duterte released a video on social media wherein he said that he was responsible for his country's anti-drug crackdown. Let's listen in to what he said.
And I think this is something to do with the law and order noon. At sinasabi ko naman sa mga pulis at military na trabaho kayo at ako ang managot. So ito na nga, for all of the whatever happened in the past, ako na yung front sa ating law enforcement pati military. Sinabi ko na I will protect you and ako ang managot sa lahat. This will be a long legal proceedings. But I say to you, I will continue to serve my country at so be it. Kung ganun ang destiny ko. Salamat.
Duterte's arrest has drawn mixed reactions as the legal battle unfolds. Duterte's daughter and current Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte flew to the Netherlands. Her office did not say what she intended to do there or how long she planned to stay in the country. Arab foreign ministers met in Qatar with US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff to talk about Gaza's reconstruction after the devastation caused by Israel's war on the territory. The ministers from Qatar, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the PLO Secretary General stressed the immediate need for a ceasefire and a fair two-state solution to ensure Palestinian aspirations for freedom and independence. Meanwhile, Hamas and Israeli delegations continue their ceasefire talks in Doha. US President Donald Trump also clarified that no Palestinians would be displaced from Gaza. China has called for a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue as it prepared to host diplomats from Tehran and Moscow for talks. The United States withdrew from a landmark deal which had imposed curbs on Iran's nuclear program in return for sanctions relief during President Donald Trump's first term. Let's listen in.
北京会晤是中方最新的外交努力，旨在加强沟通协调，为早日恢复对话谈判创造条件。在当前形势下，我们认为有关各方都应当保持冷静克制，避免伊核局势升级，甚至走向对抗冲突。中方真诚希望各方能够相向而行，不断的增信释疑，早日将重启对话谈判的势头转化为现。
NASA and SpaceX have postponed the Crew 10 mission to the International Space Station due to a last-minute technical problem. The mission, initially set to replace the current crew aboard the International Space Station, was expected to bring NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams back to Earth after a 9-month stay in space. The delay comes after a technical glitch at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Wilmore and Williams had been stranded aboard the ISS after Boeing's Starliner spacecraft encountered propulsion system failures. The mission's rescheduled timeline is still uncertain, but NASA and SpaceX might attempt a launch in the next few days. To Australia, and former Test cricketer Stuart MacGill was found guilty of being involved in the supply of cocaine, according to local media. Police said the retired leg spinner introduced his personal cocaine dealer to an associate in 2021. The two then arranged a $200,000 drug deal, police allege. Although MacGill did not take part in the actual transaction, a jury found him guilty of knowingly participating in the supply of a prohibited drug, according to media reports. However, the 54-year-old was cleared of a more serious charge of taking part in commercial-scale drug supply. MacGill played 44 tests for Australia between 1998 and 2008. His career coincided with that of Shane Warne, often considered the greatest spin bowler of all time. Moving to Africa, and Somali security forces on Wednesday ended a 24-hour siege at a hotel in the central city of Beledweyne, leaving several people dead, including the Al-Shabaab militants who launched the attack, officials have said. The attack began when a car bomb exploded on Tuesday at the Cairo Hotel, which houses traditional elders and military officers involved in coordinating the government's offensive against Al-Shabaab. The mayor of Beledweyne, Omar Al-Assal, on Wednesday said security forces had successfully ended the siege and that 6 Al-Shabaab militants died. Reports are still unclear about how many civilians were killed in the attack. Al-Shabaab, which opposes Somalia's federal government, frequently carries out bombings and assaults targeting government officials and military personnel in the Horn of Africa nation. The group controls part of rural Somalia and poses a significant threat despite sustained military operations by government troops and African Union peacekeepers. Here is what a government soldier had to say about the siege.
aadan ula dagaalanay waa waxa naftood hore waaya in kale ismiidaamin hadda soo galay dhibaato badan ayaa ka dhacday meesha.
Staying in the continent, and the African Union's Peace and Security Council has rejected Sudan's Rapid Support Forces declaration of a parallel government. The Union has warned that it threatens Sudan's unity. The Peace and Security Council has also urged AU members and the international community not to recognise or support any such entity. This comes after the RSF and some 18 other allied movements signed a charter in Nairobi establishing a government of peace and unity. The AU reaffirmed its commitment to Sudan's sovereignty and urged peaceful negotiations as the ongoing conflict has killed thousands and displaced millions since April 2023. Sudan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs welcomed the Council's position, saying it reflects the principles of Pan-Africanism. China has called for dialogue with the United States to address escalating trade tensions that have led both nations to impose significant tariffs on each other's imports. In a statement from He Yongyang, a spokeswoman for China's Ministry of Commerce, Beijing emphasised that communication should be grounded in mutual respect, equality and benefit. She urged against the use of threats and intimidation, which she said would be counterproductive. This comes after the global trade tensions that have started since US President Donald Trump's tariffs have taken place. This is what the Commerce Ministry spokesperson had to say.
任何形式的沟通和磋商，都必须建立在相互尊重、平等互利的基础上。威胁、要挟只能适得其反。希望美方和中方一道，本着相互尊重、和平共处、合作共赢的原则，回到通过对话协商来解决问题的正确轨道。
Meanwhile, President Donald Trump said his tariff plan will restore fairness to US trade as major partners like the EU and Canada announce countermeasures on new US tariffs on steel and aluminium. Here is what the President of European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, had to say. Let's listen in.
Countermeasures will be introduced in 2 steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations. We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geo-economic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Trump has also promised that the United States would respond to retaliatory EU tariffs that are being imposed from April the 1st on $28 billion worth of US products. Additionally, Canada announced additional levies on $20.7 billion of American products. President Donald Trump expressed confidence that the United States will win a trade war with the European Union. However, many companies are already feeling the strain and have taken countermeasures, like taking decisions to shift supply chains to the US. Sectors from sportswear to luxury goods in Europe are bracing for impact as tariffs drive up costs and stir concerns about inflation and a potential US recession. Meanwhile, countries like the UK and Australia have expressed their willingness for dialogue. That is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest international updates.